Why, hello there. My name is Leah. I'm a new progressive YouTuber, and I've recently started doing Wednesday and Saturday shows where I talk about the big stories, cultural trends, whatever's going on. Also, I can use my political energy for good. Today's show is going to be pretty packed with stuff. I have a lot to talk about, a lot of things to discuss, and a lot of videos to watch with you guys. And I'm also going to make a lot of predictions during today's show because I'm coming to certain conclusions that I want to share with you. And yeah, we'll talk about it. But also today, I want to try something a little bit different. I have a couple sources that I want to use that are independent news media. So one is the Crystal Kyle and Friends podcast, and the other is the Majority Report. It's probably not surprising to you that I watch a lot of political YouTube, I watch a lot of independent media, and honestly, you can find a lot of information on independent media that you can't find on mainstream media. So I hope that it's okay with you that I use other independent media sources to bring information to you. But considering I'm an independent media source and I'm just like a little YouTuber, a little baby YouTuber, I don't think anyone really cares. But yeah, today's show is going to be like a tale of two campaigns. We are going to be looking at both the Harris campaign as well as the Trump campaign, and we're going to be looking at where they are. And essentially what I want to do is try to paint for you a picture that I'm seeing quite clearly. So first up, we're going to be discussing the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz interview on CNN. I talked about this last time during my last show that this was scheduled. Now, I do think there were some kind of important moments here and stuff, but I don't want to show you the entire thing. I just want to show you some moments from it. So here is the first moment that I would like to share with you.
Economy. You are well aware that right now many Americans are struggling. There's a crisis of affordability. One of your campaign themes is we're not going back. But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Okay, before we even hear Kamala's response to that, I just want to say the framing of that question is horrendous. And I don't really watch a lot of mainstream media outside of what I do for my show and for keeping up on what they're talking about and stuff like that. I don't watch a lot of it. And so I'm not very mainstream media brained, but the way that she approached that question to me is just shockingly ridiculous. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the facts, no, you do not want to go back. But Harris also takes this in a different direction, so I appreciate her response as well.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. Literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis. When we came in, our highest priority was to do what we could to rescue America. And today, we know that we have inflation at under 3%. A lot of our policies have led to the reality that America recovered faster than any wealthy nation around the world. But you are right. Prices, in particular for groceries, are still too high. The American people know it, I know it, which is why my agenda includes what we need to do to bring down the price of groceries. For example, dealing with an issue like price gouging, what we need to do to extend the child tax credit to help young families be able to take care of their children in their most formative years, what we need to do to bring down the cost of housing. My proposal includes what would be a tax credit of $25,000 for first-time home buyers, so they can just have enough to put a down payment on a home, which is part of the American dream and their aspiration, but do it in a way that allows them to actually get on the path to achieving that goal and that dream.
I appreciate Harris's response here. Trump mismanaged the pandemic, and that definitely did a number on our economy. But to be honest, I don't even think you really need to use that as a form of attack. Trump added the most to the deficit in an incredibly long time. He passed tax cuts for the rich, and that's almost exclusively what he did. That is pretty much the big thing that he did with his administration, is help the wealthy and consolidate wealth for the wealthy. But the reason why prices are so high on things is because of corporate price gouging, from the pandemic and stuff like that. Essentially, corporations saw an opportunity to raise prices, above what they needed to, because like during the pandemic, obviously prices did rise because supply chain issues and stuff like that. But then corporations were kind of just like, well, we could raise it like $1, or maybe we could raise it $2 or $3, or guess what? You know what? Maybe we should raise it $4 or $5. So they just were like shoving the prices to the skies because they wanted to add on to their profits and stuff like that. Like they wanted to make a bunch of money even though the world was suffering with a pandemic. So like really, like that doesn't even have much to do with the role of the president. Like the reason that that all happened and stuff has nothing to do with Biden, and it has nothing to do with Trump. Like the prices were low under Trump because it was, kind of pre-pandemic for the most part during his presidency. And then near the end, you could actually argue that prices were really high under Trump because, he was also president during the pandemic, and prices did skyrocket for a lot of things during the pandemic. It's just that now we're starting to see those prices come down. And then Harris, is talking about doing something about price gouging, which would mean that she is actually the candidate who will do something about it. Do you think Trump is going to do anything about price gouging? He hasn't said a word about it. I think it's so ridiculous, the framing of this. Like CNN has tried to do this thing where they're like trying to represent both sides. They want to be the moderates in the room. They want to be the ones trying to give a voice to both sides of America. But the reality is that like the right wing, especially the media system, is so detached from reality that giving credence to the right wing narrative is essentially giving credence to like a big conspiracy theory. Like a lot of the right wing narrative today in this modern era is completely detached from fact and completely detached from reality. Like they just say stuff. They're just making stuff up most of the time. And that's just the way it is. So we don't need to both sides that. Like, I think it's really disappointing. I feel like years ago, the media was doing a pretty good job about fact checking and about making sure that they kept the discourse about reality and not about spin or about narrative. But it sort of seems like the media just got sick of fact checking. If you were to fact check Donald Trump, like during a press conference or during a speech or something, you would basically have to fact check every single sentence that comes out of his mouth. And I'm not going to lie to you, I think that the mainstream media just realized that it was easier for them to not do that and just act like they're like, oh, we're being moderates and stuff. They're just too lazy to do it.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
So I even think that secondary question right there, I think the framing for that is pretty wacky, but we're going to go ahead and move on. All right, so here we are with the next clip, and I'm just going to be honest with you. Most of this is just me showing you the insane framing of these questions because, like, her responses are all really good. Like, some people are slamming Kamala and saying that, like, she wasn't confident enough, or some sources even say that she's, like, giving word salad responses, which is absolutely not true. Like, if you listen to her responses, she gives detailed, specific responses, and a lot of them are tied or related to a policy that she supports or is going to push for as president. But okay, let's listen.
Another issue, big one, is immigration. As vice president, you were tasked with addressing the root causes of migration in southern countries and
Northern part of Central America.
the northern part
Yeah.
of Central America that affects the southern border of the U.S. During the Biden-Harris administration, there were record numbers of illegal border crossings. Why did the Biden-Harris administration wait 3.5 years to implement sweeping asylum restrictions?
So there's the question, and it's obvious by the framing of the question that they're trying to give credence to the right-wing narrative that the border is this massive issue and that it's worst under the Biden administration. What's crazy is that the Biden administration has kept a lot of the same policy positions that the Trump administration had on the border. And as a matter of fact, the Biden administration has deported more people than the Trump administration. More people. On top of that, the Democrats put forward and supported a border bill. So, like, come on. Like, what are we talking about here? Okay, so here's the next clip.
I believe it is important to build consensus. And it is important to find a common place of understanding of where we can actually solve problems.
On that note, you had a lot of Republican speakers at the convention. Will you appoint a Republican to your cabinet?
Yes, I would.
Anyone
Yes,
in
I
mind?
would. No one in particular in mind. We got 68 days to go with this election, so I'm not putting the cart before the horse, but I would. I think it's really important. I have spent my career inviting.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of people are talking about that clip where she essentially said she would put a Republican on her cabinet or whatever. And I think that's a stupid question. And I think that she gave kind of the only response she could give. Like, what? She's just gonna be like, no, we don't want to talk to them. I don't really understand what you think she's gonna say. Like, of course she doesn't have anyone in mind because she's probably not really thinking about doing it. But like, is she opposed principally to doing that? Probably not. I don't know. Like, it's kind of just a stupid question. But I did want to mention it because there are some people on the progressive left who have seen this as sort of like a red flag. Okay, so here's the next clip.
Let's talk about some foreign policy issues that would be on your plate if you become commander in chief. President Biden has tried unsuccessfully to end the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. He's been doing it for months and months, along with you. Would you do anything differently? For example, would you withhold some U.S. weapons shipments to Israel? That's what a lot of people on the progressive left want you to do.
Let me be very clear. I'm unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself. And that's not going to change. But let's take a step back. October 7, 1,200 people were massacred. Many young people who were simply attending a music festival. Women were horribly raped. As I said then, I say today, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And we have got to get a deal done. We were in Doha. We have to get a deal done. This war must end.
In the meantime,
and we must get a deal that is about getting the hostages out. I've met with the families of the American hostages. Let's get the hostages out. Let's get the ceasefire done.
but no change in policy in terms of arms and so forth.
No, we have to get a deal done. Dana, we have to get a deal done. When you look at the significance of this to the families, to the people who are living in that region, a deal is not only the right thing to do to end this war, but will unlock so much of what must happen next. I remain committed since I've been on October 8 to what we must do to work toward a two-state solution, where Israel is secure and in equal measure, the Palestinians have security and self-determination and dignity.
Okay, so a lot of people on the progressive left are not thrilled with that response. And I will admit, I'm not exactly thrilled with that response either. A lot of that is largely the same thing we have heard from her before about this issue. And of course, she gave kind of a more detailed response there. But it all kind of wraps up to her saying, we need a ceasefire done, we need a ceasefire done, and not really discussing any potential changes she would make in her administration with policy. And there is kind of a moment there where it's unsure exactly what she means, but she's being pressed on it and said, so would you change any of the policy stuff? And she said, no, we need to get a ceasefire done. And you could definitely see that potentially being her saying, I will not change policy at all. We just need to get a ceasefire deal done. And I agree, we need to get a ceasefire deal done, but it should be on the burden of the US to stop supplying the weapons that are murdering innocent civilians. So I'm not entirely sure what to say about this, to be honest. It's a little bit disappointing to hear. I wish she would take a stronger stance on this. I have thought about it a lot. There's a lot of discourse about can she take a stronger stance? What does it really mean for her to go against the president while she's the VP, all this other stuff. It's just a lot to think about. But I mean, this is a genocide and this genocide needs to end. And I don't know. Like, I feel like maybe if she put a little more pressure on Biden, maybe she could get him to do something, like actually do something instead of just say, oh, we're working on it. Oh, we're working on it, which is not, it's not going to do anything to help calm people's fears. Like, I've heard a lot of people say it, like, you can't just be trying to get a ceasefire deal done. You need a ceasefire deal done. Like, it needs to be done. It can't be this constant in progress thing. It's just not really tenable. So yeah, that's pretty much all of the substance that I really have that I want to show from that interview. I feel like a lot of it is fluff. There's a lot of really bad questions. Like, they ask about Trump saying that Kamala Harris is like not black or whatever. And I just think that that's so stupid to ask her. Like, she just quickly says like, it's dumb. Let's move on, please. You know, like that's basically her response to it. And good for her, because you know, she should just shrug that stuff off and move on to more important things to talk about. As you noticed, Tim Walz didn't speak in any of those clips. A lot of people were saying like, oh, Tim Walz is going to be with her because he needs to jump in and save her during the interview or whatever, which never happened at all. Clearly, he just waited to be asked a question, and he only gets asked like 2 questions during the entire interview directly. So clearly they thought that he was just going to jump in and stuff like that. And then they realized that they needed to ask him specific questions to get him to respond. So they like tossed a couple in here or there. But oh my God, that interview was so stupid. Like, there was so much pressure on Kamala Harris to do an interview. And like, genuinely, I'm not going to lie to you. Her attitude and her general demeanor during the interview was kind of like, I have better things to do. And it's funny because like her campaign bus is right outside the window. You can literally see it. So like, she stopped her campaign like trail, like she stopped in the middle of her campaign and she did this interview. And I feel like her entire attitude is sort of like, we got to get back to it. Are we done with this? Or, but yeah, I feel like the Kamala that we saw right there was actually kind of moderate sounding. Like, it really seems like in a lot of issues, she's trying to paint herself as this very moderate, very centrist figure, like almost like she's moving slightly to the right on certain issues. Now, I'll have more to say about that in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and jump to the next source, which is the Majority Report. So this is David Dayen. Dayen, I think that's how you say it. I'm not really sure exactly. I apologize if I get that wrong. So I saw this video today, and you need to let this guy on the left here, David, cook. You need to let him cook, because he says some things that I think are really important to hear. So let's go ahead and listen to him for a few minutes here.
He said Biden sort of inexplicably picked up the mantle of the progressive left in the Democratic Party, and at least in the context of the economic policy, I want to make that clear to everybody. Pursued what I would say the most progressive economic policies of, maybe since Johnson. And he was like, it was inexplicable. And let's just take it from there, because it was explicable. You made the point. There were 2 very prominent reasons for that: Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. So, and just to be clear, Harold Meyerson wrote that piece.
I'm sorry. Okay,
for the Prospect, but yeah, I'm familiar with it, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, the whole psychology of this goes back to the fact that John Chait wrote a book. John Chait, my old University of Michigan pal, we went there at the same time, actually. I'm using the word pal very loosely.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book at the end of 2016 called Audacity, about how great the Obama era was. And they actually had to recall the book and change some of it because Trump won. So he had to recalibrate this entire book that was put out and released because the fact that it was not a lasting legacy, at least in the short term for Obama, was made clear by the fact that his handpicked successor lost the 2016 election. So everything to that point kind of is John Chait angry about the fact that he had to change his book, and making up for this fact that his side, the agenda that he prefers, which is keep anyone to the left of like Bill Clinton circa 1996 out of the decision-making portals of the Democratic Party, lost the ability to dictate terms in the Biden regime. And there, yes, as you say, there's a very good reason for this. Going all the way back to 2016, when Bernie Sanders won primaries and had millions and millions of people vote for him. In 2020, Sanders again won early primaries, almost won the nomination, and had millions and millions of people vote for him. And Joe Biden is a party man. Joe Biden was a neoliberal when neoliberalism was cool in the 1990s. And now, in the present day, he's in the center of where the Democratic Party is today. And what he did, instead of the classic positioning of you move to the left for the primary, you move to the center for the general, what he did is he did a unity task force to try to create a popular front against Trump in 2020. And it was successful. I mean, the part of this that nobody seems to figure out is that Joe Biden won the election based on building that unity coalition, building that unity task force, and then putting together an agenda that was really based on that, at least at the domestic level, once again, to stipulate. Joe Biden didn't really have a big policy apparatus during the 2020 presidential primary. He kind of had to go to Bernie's and the Elizabeth Warrens of the world just to have something to say. It's actually an inverse of what happened after the financial crisis. There's a famous line that Tim Geithner has said often, and the line is "plan beats no plan." So after the financial crisis, the only person who came forward initially with a plan to deal with the banks was the sort of neoliberal Geithner-Summers plan. And that beat no plan, which is what everybody else had. And this is the inverse of that. So Biden didn't really have a plan for governing other than let's beat Trump and bind the nation together, right? So the plans were in the hands of the Sanders-Warren faction of the party, and the plan beat no plan. And Jonathan Chait is very upset about this, and he's trying to rewrite history, essentially.
And we should say, like, what you're talking about, because I think this is fascinating. I mean, this is the
All right, so I know we had to let him cook for a little bit there, but I feel like what was said right there was actually pretty important to recognize. In a typical campaign, usually in the primary, you go to the left, and then during the general, you kind of start moving to the right. But that's not exactly what Biden did with his presidency. And essentially, he did sort of just kind of run on beating Trump and uniting America. Like, a lot of what Biden ran on was sort of this like grandiose idea of what America is supposed to be. Like, a lot of it was just very flowery language and stuff. Like, he didn't really run on specific detailed policy positions during his campaign. And so then obviously Biden won. And once he got into office, it was sort of like the people who were there were the people that affected policy and put forward policy for the administration. And due to people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren having put people into positions where they can affect things, they were able to affect things and push for a more progressive policy platform. I think this is one of the least emphasized, least talked about things in the left wing sphere and stuff, is that like we need to put people in positions of power. We need to put people in positions where they can affect change and put them in positions where they can be a part of decisions that are important. I think a lot of people on the left have this, and especially the progressive left, have this like radical sort of revolutionary mindset where they want to tear everything down and build up a brand new, beautiful communist state or whatever. And like, okay, I get it. Socialism would be pretty lit and it would be great to have more of that within our system. But the thing is that if you're talking about changing a system, you only have one real option, which is integration. Like, you have to integrate your ideas for change into the system and then affect that throughout the system to actually get the change. But if you decide that you're going to make yourself the enemy of a system, then you become oppositional to it. And your only option rather than reform becomes to destroy the system and try to like raise it to the ground and build anew, which, you know, is very Phoenix or whatever, but it's not necessarily good in the sense that like, if we were to destroy our entire government and try to like rebuild it from scratch or whatever, obviously a lot of people would die, supply chain stuff would get super messed up. Like it wouldn't be a pretty picture. But essentially what is being said here is that the people that are going to be around Kamala Harris, because she's sort of saying and signaling that she's going to pick up the mantle of the Biden administration and carry it forward, it's essentially signaling a pretty progressive platform and pushing for pretty progressive policy positions. Now we have to go back to what we were talking about earlier, where like in the interview, she came off as pretty centrist. She said some pretty moderate things. And especially recently, it seems like she's been shifting to the right on certain issues, like emphasizing that she will sign that border bill, trying to do a couple things like mimic a couple Trump positions, like she wants to do the no tax on tips things. That's just like not really a good position, but she's signaling to the right that she is capitulating to certain things that they are saying. Now, in particular, I don't really think that that's a good idea, because right-wing world will like spin and do all sorts of things to try to make it seem like Kamala sucks anyway, even if she capitulates entirely to what they want or what they say they want. But like that's not it's not really going to make a difference in how they view her or how they interact with her in the news media cycle. But I just want to say, like, I'm not freaking out as much as other people are about this apparent like shift to the right wing or whatever. I feel pretty good that like she's going to continue a rather progressive push in terms of policy once she's actually in a position of power. And I'm not going to lie to you, I feel like she's sort of just doing the thing where she's trying to appeal to a wider voter base, and she's trying to avoid some of the typical attacks that are, you know, put forward against Democrats in elections, especially recently with the Trump era. You know, the border is a big deal. So she's trying to make it so that she can't really be attacked on those issues, because her position is as conservative as Trump's, you know, in certain scenarios. Do I think that once she's in office, the border is going to be like the big deal for her, and that's going to be like her big focus and what she spends all her time on? No, I really don't think that she's going to be all that concerned about the border. During the CNN interview, she was asked like day one, what are you going to do? And her response was entirely about the middle class, was about building up the middle class. So she didn't say day one, I'm going to shut down the border and I'm going to, like, she didn't just start spouting right-wing stuff. So I think it's more of like virtue signaling, essentially. Like, I think that she's just trying to placate the right and she doesn't really care. Like, I think that it's actually pretty clear to a lot of Democrats that the right wing cannot govern. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know what's best and they don't know what to do. And rather than trying to actually capitulate in terms of policy positions, in terms of what she's actually going to do in a governing position, she's just going to virtue signal like, oh yeah, if you put that border bill on my desk, I'll sign it, buddy. I will. I'll do it. I'll put a Republican in my cabinet. Don't you think that I won't? Because I will. But does she actually care about that stuff? Is that something that she's actually going to spend a lot of effort or energy trying to accomplish during her administration? I don't really think so. Now, do I think that it's kind of a waste of a time for her to do that? And do I think that she should run with more of a Bernie energy where she just tries to, you know, harness the power of the young and the progressive in her party? Yeah, I really think that she should focus on that. And so far in her campaign, she's done a pretty good job of that with the Tim Walz pick, with a lot of the things that she has said during her campaign, especially initially, you know, and then her record has been pretty solid in terms of like being a representative and stuff, like her voting record. I think kind of the trouble, kind of the issue with Kamala Harris is that like she doesn't have a strong governing record where we can't look at, like, she was an AG, you know, she was an attorney general, that kind of thing. So we can't really look at her as like a governor or a mayor even, or anything. Like, we can't look at like specific things that she has done from a legislation perspective or whatever to like get things done for people. And that's why I keep referencing Tim Walz and why I keep saying, like, she said that she wants to do what he did in Minnesota. And if she actually does accomplish what Tim Walz did in Minnesota, I think that people will view her as rather progressive. I just think that the Democratic Party is sort of learning slowly. Maybe it's better that they signal centrist and push for progressive policy. Like, I'm not saying that that's exactly what's happening, but I'm seeing some signs that that is sort of what is happening. I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Like right now, I'm thinking about the fact that Nancy Pelosi came out and called Tim Walz like the most moderate, the most centrist man alive, essentially. Like she had an interview where she said that Tim Walz is like the moderate, the centrist, like he represents what it means to be moderate. But then if you look at his governing record, I mean, I feel like what he got done was pretty progressive. So it's almost like the party is trying to sort of readjust the framework of how they approach politicking slightly. And they're trying to put progressive policy sort of underneath a blanket or like a cover of this is extremely moderate. This is the most moderate thing that's ever existed. You know, I think that's sort of what's going on here. But okay, I have one more video source, and it is from Crystal Kyle and Friends, the podcast. And we're just going to go ahead and listen to the beginning of this here. It's like the first 3 minutes or so.
So there was a really interesting segment where the senior advisor for this group called Target Smart that compiles all voter registration data and just does like straight up data analytics. It is a Democratic aligned firm, but they're just looking at like data and hard numbers. They crunch the numbers about who is registering to vote after the Biden dropout, and it is pretty stunning. Massive surge for Democrats in general, but specific groups of typically Dem-aligned voters are just like registering to vote like nobody's business. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that.
We're tracking something really interesting going on right now. It's a surge in voter registration in key groups ahead of the November election. Among young black women, registration is up more than 175%. You heard that right, more than 175% in 13 states. That's compared to the same time in 2020. This, according to the data firm Target Smart. Registration has also increased among young Latinas and black Americans. 175%, can that possibly be right? You must have triple checked this or many more times than that.
You're right to repeat the number because I more than triple checked it. It's incredibly unusual to see changes in voter registration that are anywhere close to this. I mean, to remind people, 175% is almost tripling of registration rates among this specific group. You just don't see that sort of thing happen in elections normally.
So the same guy tweeted out the data they're seeing, and he said the Harris effect in the 13 states that have updated voter files since July 21st, that's when Biden dropped. We are seeing incredible surges in voter registration relative to the same time period in 2020, driven by women, voters of color, and young voters. So, you know, this data to me was maybe the most persuasive thing that I've seen, just because, look, the polls have been kind of, you know, they've been right in certain elections, but a lot of times they were understating Trump support. And then in 2022, they were overstating Republican support. And so when a race is close and the margin is within the margin of error, I am not sure what to make of like how to read into those things. But this is real human beings taking real action. And one of the things he points out, Kyle, is that new voters, like newly registered voters, are much more likely to vote. And the other thing to mention about this guy in this firm is that looking at the same type of data, they were one of the few outfits that was like, there's not going to be a red wave in 2022. We just don't see the data to back up the idea that this is going to be some massive Republican wave. We just aren't seeing that. And so that also gives them added credence because they called an election right when almost everybody else, myself included, were getting it wrong.
Can I say the thing?
Say the thing, babe.
I think Trump is cooked.
Wow.
I think Trump is cooked.
I have to tell you, this data actually convinced me that you're right because, you know, in some ways you can paint a elaborate, complicated picture. In other ways, when you look at the fundamentals, it's actually not that complicated. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are significantly more popular than Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. You know, if you look at their favorability ratings, significantly more popular. Her economic platform is significantly more popular than his is. She's young and he's old. And, you know, you have she gains all of the benefit of like people being able to envision her in office, but she has not been saddled with the like Biden bad vibes. So she's kind of in a perfect position. And then the other thing that was really persuasive to me is The one area where Trump has always outperformed and where Republicans typically outperform is on who do you trust on the economy. Kamala has closed that gap.
I had that in my notes right here. I was going to respond with that to what you were saying. No, she's winning on the economy.
In
she's
some
winning.
polls, she's actually winning. And people in one poll said that she was more likely to do a better job with prices, which is, again, the like key economic issue right now, than he is. I'm starting to feel like the election's pretty simple. People just like her better than him. They're like disgusted with the Trump era. Her policies are more popular than his. People like her more on the number one issue that, they're telling pollsters, and then you add abortion on top of that, and you see these voter registration surges, and, there's a lot that could happen between now and then, but it's looking damn good for her.
I haven't even hit you with the mic drop facts yet.
Okay.
So far you showed some pretty devastating facts that key Democratic demographics have skyrocketed in terms of registering to vote.
Yeah.
But there's other facts that I think really are mic drop moments. So one of the big ones is voter enthusiasm.
Yeah.
New numbers have just come out on that. 78% of Democrats are enthusiastic to vote in this election. That's the highest since 2008. Which was Barack Obama's moment, which everybody looks at, all political scientists, all political experts look at and say, that was a really special moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Where the
definitely.
enthusiasm was through the freaking roof, and now we're at that level. By the way, what's the Republican number? 64%. So you have 78 to 64. That's a big deal. Another fact, which is super important, some polls just came out. In fact, it was a Fox News poll, and they have the Democratic Senate candidate, Gallego in Arizona, is up 15 points on Kari Lake. She is getting smoked. There is no scenario where Ruben Gallego wins by 15 points over Kari Lake and Kamala does not beat Trump in Arizona.
Yeah.
Right? Then we also have in Nevada. This is a place where Trump was up until very recently. Rosen, the Democrat, is up 14 points on her Republican opponent.
Wow.
You have Stein in North Carolina, up 11 points. I think his opponent, isn't it that Mark Robinson guy, that absolute psychopath?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, guys, these numbers are, honestly, they spell bloodbath for the Republicans, and I still haven't even told you the most devastating fact. So
Okay.
you brought up Kamala's up on the economy.
Right.
Never in my lifetime, even under Obama, I don't think the Democrats beat the Republicans when it came to the issue of handling the economy.
Yeah.
Okay? The other thing is favorability numbers.
Yeah.
Kamala is way more liked than Donald Trump when it comes to favorability, and Tim Walz is just leagues above J.D. Vance, who, by the way, keeps plummeting day after day. And then the other thing is, this is the ace up the sleeve for Democrats. Guys, there are direct votes on abortion rights in the following states: Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Missouri, Nevada, New York, South Dakota.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to trim some of that a little bit to try to like make it a little shorter because I want to show a good chunk of what they were talking about there, but I can kind of trim some of it out. But yeah, if you take a look at all of the data that they just put forward there, the picture that paints is very clear, and that's a lot of different data being pulled together, where it's not just looking at like, oh, just voter registration, or oh, we're just looking at favorability, or oh, we're just looking at the economy. Like, no, in multitudes of ways, we can see great enthusiasm for this election, high favorability for the Democrats. We can see that the popular positions are the Democrat positions. That's what people tend to want, even in the economy, even in terms of the economy, which is, in my lifetime is kind of unprecedented. So, that's really cool to see. So this is the part where I just say, like, essentially, unless something happens, like, unless there is something that is just, I can't even predict, and it's just some big event, some big black swan event, like, unless something happens, Kamala Harris is going to win. Like, she will win this election. Now, Trump could still win, but he's flailing. He's doing really poorly in terms of campaigning, and there's not long left. Like, Trump right now, if he wanted to win, would need to be buckling down. He would need to be hammering Kamala Harris with new attacks that were catchy and really dragged her down and really, really, really affected her favorability and how the party views her. And you know, he would be trying to shift the narrative and all this stuff. He's not doing any of that. He's doing a terrible job. And actually, we're going to move on to talk about Trump because we haven't really talked about Trump much. I have all of this data to show you about Kamala Harris and how great she's doing and all this stuff. And what does Trump have? Trump has this. Maybe you've seen this. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've heard about this. Maybe you haven't. But Trump basically did a political campaign event at Arlington Cemetery, and this is the result of it. There's also more to this story, but look at this photo. This is absolutely astonishing. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. But as you can see, Donald Trump is giving a thumbs up and smiling behind the graves of recently deceased soldiers. As you can also see, there are people here who are mimicking Trump, and some of them look, you know, a little bit uncomfortable to be doing so. I think that this kid over here has it right. I think that his expression sums up the situation really well. Like he has the proper expression. Everyone else is kind of just not doing it right. Here's an NPR article discussing this event. Army says Arlington National Cemetery worker was pushed aside by Trump aides. The U.S. Army said an employee of Arlington National Cemetery who tried to ensure adherence to rules that prohibit political activities at the cemetery was abruptly pushed aside, but that the employee decided not to press charges against the Trump campaign staffers who allegedly pushed her. So it goes on to describe how, like, they were briefed about the rules and regulations at Arlington Cemetery. They knew what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. And yeah, the article continues to say the statement comes a day after Trump shared a TikTok video including footage from Arlington National Cemetery that likely violates a federal law against using military cemeteries for campaigning purposes. And it's not the first time Trump has been accused of politicizing the military, but the campaign is seeking to downplay what happened in the aftermath. Trump was at Arlington on Monday to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of an attack in Afghanistan during the withdrawal that killed 13 U.S. service members. Trump and other Republicans have blamed President Biden and Vice President Harris for the chaos and loss of life. The Trump campaign was not authorized to film or photograph in Section 60. Federal law prohibits the use of military cemeteries for campaign events, and 2 campaign staffers got into physical and verbal altercation with the Arlington staffer who tried to prevent the filming. In a statement after NPR's original story, family members present Monday said they invited Trump and gave approval for his photographer and videographer to document an emotional moment of remembrance. So the Trump campaign responds. In the aftermath of the visit to Arlington, the Trump campaign's response has taken on the tone of nastiness. One spokesman said the cemetery staffer was clearly suffering from a mental health episode and promised to release footage of the encounter, but has so far declined to do so. On the campaign trail in Pennsylvania on Wednesday, the Republican Vice President nominee J.D. Vance said Harris could go to hell over the Afghanistan withdrawal and blamed reporters for the campaign's controversy, which he called a disagreement. You guys in the media, you're acting like Donald Trump filmed a TV commercial at a gravesite. He was there providing emotional support to a lot of brave Americans who lost loved ones they never should have lost. And there happened to be a camera there, and somebody gave him permission to have that camera there. This is not the first time Trump has been accused of politicizing the military for his personal gain. He's allegedly called dead soldiers suckers and losers, insulted the late Senator John McCain for being a prisoner of war, and he stoked controversy by saying the Civilian Medal of Freedom is better or more honorable than the Medal of Honor because the people who get it are not usually maimed, injured, or dead. So then I have another article from The Hill. Trump defends conduct at Arlington Cemetery. I wasn't doing it for publicity. So here we have this quote: "I wasn't doing it for publicity. I get a lot of publicity," the former president said. "I would like to get a lot less publicity. I'm the only guy that would hire a public relations agency to get less publicity." So that is the most recent Trump campaign story, and it's essentially like Trump is pouring gasoline on his campaign and lighting it on fire. Doing something so stupid that the military, the army, has to respond to it and like denounce your actions is absolutely absurd. It is it's kind of a new low, actually. Like, I genuinely kind of find it shocking that this happened in the first place, because if you know anything about decorum, you know that Arlington is a very sacred place. It's like you do not mess around there. It's very ceremonial. And there are a lot of rules, and those rules are there for a reason. So yeah, he just goes around breaking federal law and thinks that he can get away with it. Like, genuinely, Trump is just spiraling. Like, he's doing terribly, and I mean I'm all for it. Like, if he wants to keep breaking laws and keep making people hate him. Like, I mean, I don't respect what he did here because it's ridiculous. Like that photo of him with the thumbs up and stuff, like that is just psychopath level stuff. Like that is just absolutely wild to see. I'm not gonna lie. It's shocking. But yeah, I'm curious to see if this actually makes a difference with people who are in the army or in the military and how they view Trump. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. That is actually all of the content. I've been recording for 1 hour and 15 minutes. So that's kind of a long one for me. I feel like this is going to be a pretty long show. I'm going to try to cut it down as much as I can, try to trim the fat and all that stuff. But I'm bringing you as much as the stuff as I can bring you. I just sort of had like a moment today, and this is the part where I make predictions and stuff. But I had a moment where I was watching all this stuff and I'm seeing all these numbers and I'm watching the events happen, and especially after this Arlington cemetery thing. I mean, like Trump is cooked. He's done. Like it's kind of game over. Like unless something really big happens, I don't see Trump winning this election. And thank goodness for that as well. Also, like I really do not want Trump to win this election. But yeah, I find it kind of surprising that we're here. I mean, like just a month or two ago, things were looking pretty grim for the Democratic Party. And here we are, and things are looking really good. And it just goes to show that like a lot of like the standard political knowledge, kind of like the common assumption or whatever, was that Biden should stay in the race. And there are still people saying that like it was a bad decision for Biden to drop out of the race. But at this point, I feel like they're just like smearing egg all over their face, because how could you be looking at everything that's happening and not see that this was like the best decision that they could have possibly have made? So yeah, that's all I have for you today. That is the tale of two campaigns. And I haven't even mentioned that she's raised like $500 million for her campaign. Like she has so much money, it's actually wild. So I hope she's able to spend a lot of that. I hope she's able to make use of her campaign funds and all the energy and momentum that she has, and I hope she's able to blaze a campaign trail the likes of which no one has ever seen before. We need to defeat Trump. We need to defeat Trump. We have to beat Trump. Like there's a lot going on in the world. The Gaza genocide is incredibly important. That needs to end today, right now. But also, like, you know, Trump needs to lose this election. He really needs to lose this election. It would be in the interest of everybody except for Trump, if Trump were to lose the election. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. I'm curious what you thought if you watched the whole show, if you heard all of this information, all these numbers and stuff like that. Did this persuade you? Does this make you feel like, holy crap, we're gonna win this election? Things are gonna be okay. We're gonna avoid a second Trump term. How do you feel? I'm curious. Make sure to leave a like on the video. We're moving towards our first 100 subscribers. So if you want to hit the subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me. I would super appreciate it. I will be back on Wednesday with another show, but until then, just do one little tiny favor for me. Make sure you check your registration, your voter registration. And if you're not registered to vote, please do so. And also make sure that you drink some water.